Who's next? Gentleman right here.
My name's Bob Brammer. I live about 5 or 6 blocks away in Beaverdale, and we're really glad you came here, Mr. President.
Thank you. It's not hard to come here. This is a nice neighborhood, by the way.
Yes,
I mean,
it's great.
I love these big
Here,
trees.
here.
So, yeah, it's beautiful.
My question relates to things halfway around the world and how they affect the economy, particularly the wars and the enormous amount of spending that has gone into that over the last decade, not just the last couple of years. So this is what I'd ask. Those decade-long conflicts have had an enormous cost in terms of people killed and wounded, our men and women and other peoples who are killed, and they've had a gigantic cost in terms of money and resources and people diverted to the war. When can we look forward to reducing the huge spending on these wars, and is it possible that kind of funds could help us square up our budget and give us crucial resources to strengthen our economy right here at home?
Well, I said at a speech I made at West Point talking about Afghanistan that I'm interested in nation building here at home. That's the nation I want to build more than anything else. As you know, because it was a big issue when I was campaigning here in Iowa, I was opposed to the war in Iraq from the start. I made a commitment that I would bring that war to a responsible end. We have now ended our combat mission in Iraq, and we've pulled out 100,000 troops out of Iraq since I was in office. So that's a commitment we followed up on. Now, Afghanistan was a war that most people right after 9/11, I think, overwhelmingly understood was important and necessary. We had to go after those who had killed 3,000 Americans. We had to make sure that al-Qaeda did not have a safe haven inside Afghanistan to plan more attacks. And, you can speculate as to whether if we hadn't gone into Iraq, we had just stayed focused on Afghanistan, whether by now we would have created a stable situation and we would not have a significant presence there. But that's not what happened. So when I walked in, what we had was a situation in Afghanistan that had badly deteriorated over the course of 7 years, and where the Taliban was starting to take over half of the country again. You had a very weak Afghan government, and in the border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, you had al-Qaeda still plotting to attack the United States. Now, I had said during the campaign, we need to make sure that we're getting Afghanistan right. And what I committed to when I came into office was we'll put additional resources, meaning troops and money on the civilian side, to train up Afghan forces, make sure that the Afghan government can provide basic services to its people. But what I also said is we're not going to do it in an open-ended way. We're going to have a time frame within which Afghans start having to take more responsibility for their own country. And I said that on July of next year, we're going to begin a transition of shifting from U.S. troops to Afghan troops in many of these areas. Now, the situation there is very tough. Afghanistan is the second poorest country in the world. There are a lot of countries in the world. This is the second poorest. It has a 70% illiteracy rate. Afghanistan was much less developed than Iraq was. And it had no significant traditions of a strong central government that could provide services to its people, or a civil service, or just the basic infrastructure of a modern nation state. So we're not going to get it perfect there. It is messy, it is hard, and the toughest job I have is when I deploy young men and women into a war theater, because some of them don't come back, and I'm the one who signs those letters to family members, offering condolences for the enormous sacrifice of their loved ones. But I do think that what we are seeing is the possibility of training up Afghan forces more effectively, keeping pressure on al-Qaeda so that they're not able to launch big attacks, and that over the next several years, as we start phasing down, those folks start lifting up. Here's the impact it'll have on our budget. There are going to be still some hangover costs from these two wars. The most obvious one being veterans, which we haven't always taken care of as well as we should have, and I've had to ramp up veterans spending significantly because I think that's a sacred trust. They've served us well. We've got to serve them well. And that means services for post-traumatic stress disorder, reducing backlogs in terms of them getting disability claims, help specifically for women veterans who are much more in the line of fire now than they'd ever been before. All those things cost some money. So there's even as we start winding down the war in Afghanistan, it's not as if there's going to be a huge peace dividend right away. But what it does mean is we'll be able to more responsibly manage our military budget. And this is another example of where you can't say you want to balance the budget and not take on reform in the Pentagon. I mean, we've already pushed hard to eliminate some weapons programs in the Pentagon budget that the generals, the people who actually do the fighting, say we don't need. But getting those programs shut down is very difficult because typically there's not a single weapons program out there that doesn't have some part being built in 40 different congressional districts in 10 or 20 different states so that everybody has a political vested interest in keeping it going. And Bob Gates, my defense secretary, has been really good about pushing hard on that, and we've won some battles, but that's going to be an area that we're going to have to take a serious look at as well when we put forward a plan for getting a handle on our long-term debt and deficits. Okay?